Okay, hello everybody. Uh, today we're going to look at our last method to determine the outcome of an election, and this is the method of pairwise comparisons. How does it work? So we take up all of our list of candidates and we look at each possible pairwise head-to-head matchup. So the first step in this method is to make a list of head-to-head matchups. And in other words, we find each pair of candidates, make a whole list of them. The second step is we'll take our preference schedule and we'll determine for a given head-to-head matchup the outcome if we were to eliminate all of the other candidates. So for each head-to-head matchup, we determine the winner. And then the third step is to award 1 point for the winner of each of the head-to-head matchups. So award the winner 1 point. Now, in the event of a tie, so if tie, in other words, if a given head-to-head matchup is a tie, then award each candidate a half point. Each candidate gets 1/2 point. Finally, we look over all of the different head-to-head matchups and we add up the points for the various candidates. So add up points for each candidate. This, assuming that we have sort of different points values for each of the candidates, we'll get a full ranking of our candidates and hopefully a winner. So I'm going to organize this step-by-step process in a table that I've prepared ahead of time. But if you don't have this, you can just write out, the preference schedule and copy it each time, and then do exactly this exercise. All right, so let's take a look. And the example I'm going to start with here is the example of the math club that was discussed in previous videos. So in the math club example, you can see there are 4 candidates, right? There's A, B, C, and D. And so we need to list by step 1 all of the possible pairs, all of the different pairs or head-to-head matchups that we could possibly make. And in this case, there's 6 such pairs. So there's A versus B, A versus C, A versus D, B versus C, and then B versus D, and C versus D. So this is the number of possibilities, 6 of them. And for each of these, we need to go ahead and calculate the head-to-head matchup results. So what I've done here is I've just copied the preference schedule over and over again. I haven't changed anything. It looks, I'm sure, quite complicated, but it's really just a copy one by one. So we're going to go ahead and methodically work through this and see what this pairwise comparison method might give us. All right. So in the first head-to-head matchup, A versus B, we need to eliminate the remaining candidates from our preference schedule. So in this case, it's C and D, and we'll just go ahead and eliminate those guys so that we can compare just A and B. Great. So now once we've done that, we need to count up the votes that A wins in this head-to-head matchup first. So we can see that A wins the 14 votes here, and that's it, right? So since A wins 14 votes, we can write down 14 here. And then B wins the remaining votes, which is 10 plus 8 plus 4 plus 1, which is 23. Great. So the winner in this case is B, because B received more votes in this head-to-head matchup, and we'll give B 1 point. Great. So now we just have to rinse and repeat, going down one by one. So at this point, you might want to put me on double speed if you haven't already. So A versus C, we're going to eliminate B and D. And count up the votes. All right, how many votes does A receive? Again, A receives 14. And we can see this sort of clearly because A is receiving all of these fourth place votes. So it's kind of easy to calculate these. A is going to get 14. C is going to get 23, just as in A versus B. And you won't be shocked to see that this is the same result in the next head-to-head matchup. But here again, we get that C wins, and so C is awarded 1 point. Okay, great. As I said, A versus D is going to have a similar flavor. We can just eliminate B and C. So let's go ahead and do that. So B and C are off of our schedule. And as we predicted, A just still wins 14, and D will win the remaining 23 votes, so that D is the victor in this head-to-head matchup and receives 1 point. All right. Now we've got 3 more of these to calculate, so let's go ahead and do that. We've got a B versus C head-to-head matchup. So B versus C, we're going to eliminate A and D. And let's go ahead and see who's winning. So B wins here. B wins here. All right, so B won 14 plus 4, 18 votes. And the remaining votes go to C, but let's count those up. C wins this, C wins this, and C wins this. So 10 plus 8 plus 1 is 19. And so we see that C wins this head-to-head matchup and, gets 1 point. All right, great. Moving on, we've got B versus D, so we'll eliminate A and C. And, And now we want to compare B and D. Let's count up the points that B receives. B receives these, and that's all. Oops, no, I forgot about this one. Okay, so 14 plus 10 plus 4 is 28. 28. D, on the other hand, is receiving these 8 votes and this 1 vote. So that's 8 plus 1, which is 9. So B does win in this head-to-head matchup. All right, and then we've got one last head-to-head matchup to compute the winner of, and that's C versus D. So A and B, we'll remove them from this preference schedule. And now we just need to calculate the number of votes for C and for D. So for C, we see that C is the winner here, here, and here. So that's 14 plus 10 plus 1, and that's exactly 25. On the other hand, pardon me, D wins these votes and these votes. So 8 plus 4 is 12. And we see that C is the big winner here. All right, great. So now let's go ahead and count up the total. I'm going to shrink this down a bit so that I can see everything. So we see that A receives how many points? None. A has 0 points because A doesn't win any head-to-head matchups. C received a point here, and a point here. So C does get 3 points. I don't know why I jumped to C, but let's write C, 3 points. B receives 2 points because B won these 2 head-to-head matchups. And D just gets 1 point. So if we were to rank, get a full ranking as our outcome, our ranking is going to be C for the most points, B the second most points, D, and then A. So this is the ranking outcome. So first place, second, third, and fourth. So we see that in particular, C wins. And in fact, C, if you'll recall, was the Condorcet candidate. C won all of the matchups, head-to-head matchups that it could have possibly won. So C, when you put C against A, it won. When you put C against B, it won. And when you put C against D, it won. So that's the Condorcet candidate if every single head-to-head matchup that candidate's winning. And whenever you have a Condorcet candidate, that candidate will be the winner of the method of pairwise comparison. If you think about it for a minute, you'll realize that that must be the case. However, there may be cases where there's no Condorcet candidate, and method of pairwise comparison will still yield a winner. However, we can look at another example, one that we've visited in previous videos, and do the same kind of calculation of method of pairwise comparisons. And let's see what we get when we do this example that I've listed before. So this is A versus B. We'll eliminate C, and we'll see. So A gets 32 points, and you can see that B is going to get 68 points. In the A versus C, I'll go to the winners at the end. So in the A versus C, we eliminate B. Oops. And here we see that A receives 32 points. Again, oh, I'm sorry, I made a mistake here. Apologize. So in this first example, I was rushing a bit, but let me return to it. This first example, A won both of these ballots. So A received 67 points and B received the 33 points. Okay, returning to the A versus C case, here A did only receive 32 points and C received 68. And then finally, in the B versus C, we eliminate A, and we see that B received the 65 points from these two ballots, these two types of ballots, and then C received the 35 points. So who is the winner? Who are the winners? In A versus B, A won with 1 point. In A versus C, C won with 1 point. And in B versus C, B won with 1 point. So in this example, you see that all three candidates received exactly the same number of points. And so here, the method of pairwise comparison doesn't really yield anything at all. So I'm putting this example in here just to illustrate that when you have very few candidates, well, when you have in particular 3 candidates or 4 candidates, it may be the case that you don't get a clear determination of a winner here. So on the other hand, if you have many candidates, it's likely that this method will produce a definite winner. All right. That's all for the comparison method of pairwise comparisons. And this is the last sort of methods that we'll look at in this week.